What is Exhibit 102?
This is, it looks like the one of the summative, or the appraisal, the end of the appraisal summatives.
Okay.
Yes.
And so these would be your
Yes.
notes regarding
Yes. Uh-huh.
performance
Yes.
As part of the intervention.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
On the bottom of the first page under 1A,
Yes.
there's a paragraph that talks about Mrs. Souter has a little knowledge of professional ethics and integrity as mandated by the State of Nebraska American School Counselor Association.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes on to talk about the problem with the calling for the food kids.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe what that is about? What's the food kids and what was the issue? Sorry.
Absolutely. So we are fortunate to receive the backpack program in our district, and the fortunate thing is that on Fridays students get to go home. A selected group of students get to go home with food, and we ask that this is very confidential because, as you know, this is something that is it's very critical that these students aren't identified, and we don't want kids to know which students are selected. We can't select every student, and also we don't want students to be identified as being free and reduced and all of those pieces. So it's very critical that this is confidential. Unfortunately, this was not confidential at our school. Several ways that this was not confidential. Number one, an email was put out to the entire Gilder staff every week, and it just was titled Food Kids, Friday Food Kids, and it went to all Gilder staff. Now, this is not an email blast that went to just my Gilder staff, because this is a Gilder staff email that was generated by TAC, and so this went to anybody that was part of Gilder. So any administration that was part of Gilder, that was anybody tied to Gilder. So that would be anybody up here that was tied to Gilder too. So any of those people would receive this. They would receive that. Number two, it would say, like, send your Friday food kids from 2 to 4. Anybody, those kids would just be walking down the hall from 2 to 4, or at 2 o'clock they'd just go down there. Also, they would go down and they would check their own name off, so they'd see all the other students listed, and they would check their own name off. This is not appropriate, this is not confidential, and this is not how it's supposed to be. That's not how the backpack program wants it to be. I've talked to those supervisors from the food bank, and that's not how they asked for it to be.
And was Mrs. Souter, was that discussed with her as well?
Yes, it was discussed so many times with Mrs. Souter to be done differently. I talked to different counselors at different buildings. How was it done? I talked to different principals at different buildings. How does your counselor do it? What do they do? And it just wasn't done.
Okay. Then if you want to flip to the third page of Exhibit 102.
The third page.
And there's in the middle it says 2C, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a second paragraph under there that talks about students who do not attend guidance. Can you tell us what happened there? Why are those students not attending?
Okay, I'm sorry. I just need to
Oh,
find
it
this
says
one.
at least 13 students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and they didn't attend guidance for different reasons. Some of it was by parent request. Some of it was student request, and some of it was teacher request.
Okay. And is that unusual in your experience to have 13 students?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then did you include your other observations on Exhibit 102 that you felt were important in concluding the intervention?
Did I include them?
Did you include the important
Yes.
information in
Yes.
Exhibit 102?
Yes.
Okay. And were all of these issues that are in Exhibit 102 issues that had been previously discussed with Mrs. Souter, and so that she had knowledge that these were areas that needed to be improved, but you're not seeing that needed improvement?
Yes.
Okay. And then if you want to look at Exhibit 101. And do you know what Exhibit 101 is?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
That is the formal intervention plan summary. So this is just the summary of how the plan,
At the end?
the end, yes.
Okay. And did you have input in preparing this?
Yes. So we did a summative, and then this is how the plan
Right,
got
okay.
written.
And how did you end up ranking her?
It ended up being unsatisfactory.
Okay. And let's look here. There's also mention of the annual school counseling plan submitted by Mrs. Souter was completely inaccurate depiction of the school counseling activities she had in place. Can you tell
Yes.
us about that?
Sure. So there's a school counseling plan that gets created, and so it's a month-to-month plan, and the school counselors fill out this plan each year, and they put in their activities that they plan to do for the student body, and really to encompass as a whole what they hope to provide for the building. And so she had put in all of these activities, each month. And as I'm going through this plan, I'm looking at it, and there's all these activities that she either A, is not involved with, B, doesn't do, or we don't even do at Gilder. And so it was completely inaccurate, and it was unethical. I mean, the document was it was just falsified. I mean, she wrote things like science night. Like we don't have science night. We didn't have science night. She put it on there. She wrote. She wrote like a Cinco de Mayo parade. She doesn't take the kids to Cinco de Mayo parade. She had it on there. She had all these things that she was stating she did, or she was in charge of, or we had at Gilder, and it's not even accurate. And so instead of filling up this document with all these false statements, I would just have had her. I would have loved for her just to focus in on something and do it well. Just focus in on one or two things and just really focus in on that. So I'm not really sure why she filled it up with a lot of things, but she did. And so it was just really unethical to write all these things in that aren't true.
And how many other school counselors have you worked with as a principal?
One.
Okay. And can you tell us, have you worked with school counselors in other capacities as well?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay.
As a building teacher, as an instructional facilitator, and then as an assistant principal, and as a principal.
And can you tell us how this, your experience with Mrs. Souter compared to your experience with other school counselors?
Oh, the school counselor just in the other capacities that I worked in, just they were very approachable, and they were people that were trustworthy. They were people that were dependable. They were people that were there for kids. They worked for kids. They believed in kids. They knew how to really manage students, and they. The counselor was somebody that could go really into any classroom and kind of cover a classroom if something, if you needed to work with a teacher, like that counselor is kind of like, wow, that counselor could take over really any situation, because wow, they really had they could just reach any student, I always felt. And so the management of a counselor was always amazing to me. Yeah.
And did you experience that with Mrs. Souter?
Unfortunately, no.
Okay. And do you support the administration's recommendation to terminate her contract?
I do. I don't know that education is the right setting for her.
Thank you. I have nothing further at this time.
Mr. Wade, do you have questions for the witness?
I do, thank you. Could I ask you to slow down a little bit in your delivery when you're speaking, so I can, follow a little bit more carefully?
I'll try.
Okay,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I'm just asking if it's possible. You've mentioned the plan on 102, page 3, maybe, that you thought that she did not fill out properly, or that she falsified in some manner or another. Where is that plan?
It's in here.
Did you take that, did you get that plan or talk with her about that plan?
Yes.
Did you tell her that there were certain things that she wasn't on or that Gilder didn't offer?
Yes.
Did you tell her that she wasn't on the attendance team and she put that on there?
Yes, we can get the plan out. It's in here.
Okay, let's do that. I think
Yep.
that'd be a good thing to do. Do you know where it is? I mean, these
I
are your
don't,
documents.
honestly.
Yeah.
I did not make this book. I'm sorry.
Your attorney did.
But you can look through here and find it. I'm not sure where it is.
Maybe your attorney knows.
What are you looking for?
The plan that we've been talking about in Exhibit 102.
Formal or
No, not the formal plan, the counseling, let's see, what is it?
School
The
counseling plan.
No. No.
It's not in here? So,
What? I'm sorry.
it's not in here.
Dr. Bond
What
will,
was, you can ask me the question maybe?
Dr. Bond
again?
will speak to it.
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to know, you're speaking about the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to understand what is on the plan. Could you show me on the plan where she identified something that was incorrect?
It's a very
no, I'm-
lengthy plan.
It's, wait, I just want to clarify. We're talking about the intervention plan.
No, I'm talking about the performance, or excuse me, the
The school counseling plan.
school
Oh,
counseling
okay,
plan was
okay.
mentioned in 101
Okay,
too.
I apologize.
Okay.
It's okay.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry, too. That's fine. I just, okay. So
I can look for it. I think it might be in here somewhere because I did
fine.
see it, and it's very lengthy, and it's
I
got a
think-
lot of crossouts.
I think your attorney said it wasn't in
Well,
there.
there's a rubric that has it, so we can sure find
Well,
that.
I want to know if the plan is in here, so I can see the plan.
The rubric
That's
will.
what I'm asking.
Okay, the rubric will discuss it, and you've had these for a while, so I'll look through it and
Yeah,
find
I-
it for you.
How about if we take a 5-minute recess and you find it so
Okay.
that we don't keep going back and forth?
Okay,
It just
that
seems
sounds
a little.
like a good idea.
All right, let's do that.
Where's that rubric?
I know Nancy has a copy of it out there.
That's it, plan.
What is
I know,
it?
and that's what I say. I don't know what these broad statements are all about.
that's right.
Jeez.
It's not redone yet, though.
Sort of a plan, detail,
Okay.
it's not here.
Okay, so that's something you. Yeah, yeah,
Okay, that's Exhibit 1.
yeah. So that's. I've got to find it too. Oh, I got the kindergartner.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I remember seeing that.
I think that's not it. Yep, keep going.
Yeah.
Yep,
There we go.
there it is.
Okay,
so we-
it's 167. That's where you're talking about there, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
This is it.
Okay. I know. I was like, I know I saw it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's 167, Rick, that she'd be referring to.
Okay, great, thank
We
you.
found it.
Do you want me to hang on to this?
Yeah.
Or
if
I
you
can
wanna-
just look at
you
it.
want to flip to
Perfect.
167? I think I'm in the dash of my car. Sorry, I'm like throwing your paper down.
I have last year's to show it was just, we have last year's calendar to show us just to see.
I don't think I have my notes. We might have. I can't recall if we do. I just want to make this point, but unfortunately, there's just too much stuff, and I hope this will, you might have to identify this. You know that?
I was asking her about the student.
Yeah, and there was a student here that we and a part of it, and you also asked. And you
All right, for the record, for the court reporter, we are back on. And Ms. Gutierrez Fox, you were looking for a document. Where are we at?
Yes, we located it, and
We found it.
it was Exhibit 167.
Okay, Mr. Wade, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Would you please turn to 167, please?
Sure.
And I'm just trying to work through some of this. I'm not going to get through all of it. It'll probably be something I'll have to ask Ms. Souter. But I'm trying to figure out, since I have some information, I want to make sure that I understand whether or not on the last, let me see what it is. It's the fourth page. In April, she says that there's a note here apparently that she put attendance team, not on attendance team. You see that?
Correct.
So when I ask you if she's on the attendance team, since I don't know about a number of these other things, and what is your answer?
No.
Okay. I'm going to show you.
She previously had been on the attendance team.
Okay. Yeah, might have to have somebody else identify this.
What is it?
I'll show it to you.
What is it?
That you are part of, says you are part of it.
Is this an additional exhibit?
2016.
This, at this time, I would take a motion from the board to accept, wait, I'm sorry. Is there objection from
Let me see it.
Ms. Gutierrez Fox?
Is there, I'm sorry.
Are you, I guess, are you introducing,
Yeah, no,
and
I'll-
then there's their
It's
foundation
not
to
for
what
me.
you're
I'll go ahead
introducing?
and- I'll go ahead
It's
and
not
go
for
through
me.
it.
And can you turn your mic on, please?
It is. I will go through the questions to ask the witness, okay?
But
So,
you haven't offered it?
no.
Oh, okay.
Would you please take a look at Exhibit 30? Sorry.
It's okay. He's handing you one.
Point of work. We should not be passing that out yet
Not
until
yet,
it's
yes.
offered.
Have you had an opportunity to look at this?
I guess we have a number of questions, so we're just, as you might understand, this is new for us, so I'm going to ask our legal counsel to just provide the Board of Education with some background here so that we understand legally where we're at.
Excuse me, council is trying to lay foundation, and so in order prior to him introducing this exhibit, he's got to ask some questions to give some foundation for the document in order for it to get introduced into,
Sure.
Assuming that there are no objections from the other side. So first thing that happens is he will refer to the exhibit, he will ask some questions, and then I'm assuming council will then offer the exhibit, and at that time, then it depends on if the other side has any objections to it, and we'll go through the objection process is what will happen next for the Board of Education.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Waite.
Thank you. You are looking at Exhibit 30, what has been marked as Exhibit 30?
Okay.
Are you or are you not?
I'm looking at it, yes.
Thank you. Do you know what this is?
No.
Okay, you may not, maybe something someone else will have to prepare or lay foundation for.
No.
All right, you do not know
No.
what this conversation is?
No.
Okay. Let's move on to then another matter.
Would you like your document back?
No, that's fine. I won't just I can, if you can just stack it up and I'll take it back if you want me to, because then I'll lay
If
foundation. in
everyone
another-
could pass back to me this document, it's not being entered as an exhibit. Thank you.
I think I'll work backwards so you have some idea. I'm going to. Would you please look at Exhibit 102? And would you please look at the first page? Do you have it?
Yes.
You gave a certain amount of testimony as to the Food Kids designation. You talked with Ms. Souter about that some time ago, and then she discontinued using it. Isn't that correct?
Discontinued
She
using
didn't use
what?
after you brought it to her attention. At some point in time, she quit using the term Food Kids. I mean,
She did. She continued to use it after she was still on.
Okay.
After informal, she continued to use it while she was on formal.
and where is this email, this 2/19/16 email? Shows that she's used it.
It's in here.
Okay, let's look at, I'll help you with that maybe because I hope I'm one step ahead. Would you look at 130, please? Is that the email?
These are the types of email blasts.
No,
that-
I said, is that the email? Because you said it was on that particular date. Is this the email? It has a date of 3/19/2015, which would not have been during the plan. So is this the email you're talking about?
And this is not the email I'm referring to.
Well, do you have the email? Or, I mean, I'd like to know that there's some way to confirm that what you're putting down is correct, because we have an email here, Exhibit 130, and that's the last time that apparently it is in here, because I don't see it used on another document anywhere, emails or anything else.
They're in here. We'll get you the number. You've had these since May.
Well, I've had 487 pages from
Okay.
you, so, but I didn't know what you were going to use till Friday. And I'm just wondering, is this not the email?
Everything in the plan
130.
was
130.
accurate,
Okay,
so-
everything in the plan is accurate. So there should be an email somewhere that
It said
is.
the date, so that was the date that she did it on
Okay,
after the formal.
all right.
So it was
Well, if you thought
219.
if you thought it was so important to put it in that particular document, why did you not bring it to her attention specifically?
we did this intervention.
No, I don't mean intervention, but show her the email, because she's going to say, I didn't see the email. I did not do it during the intervention
She
plan.
wrote the email.
No, well, that's just it. But do you have it? Do you have it somewhere? Because you said it's been used. Where did you get the
I
date?
didn't make this binder.
Where did you get the date? That is,
The date is from the email that she wrote.
but problem is nobody knows where that email is, or even if it exists. Right.
We could pull it up.
Well, I'm just trying to make this as
Okay.
specific and
Okay,
direct
sure.
as possible.
Sure. All I know is this is the date.
It's
so.
accurate, but you don't know where it is, and you didn't bring it to our attention, but you did
We
bring...
brought it to our attention then, and we brought it to our attention in this document, so.
Well, but I don't see where it was brought to our attention, and you have marked an exhibit in here specifically with the food kids that is
It
not...
was brought to our attention a lot before this,
Well,
and in this document.
When and where and
before
where
when
was
she
it
sent
documented? I need to know something specific for my client. I'm not trying to be argumentative. I just want to make sure that my client has an opportunity to say yes or no, that did not happen. I did not prepare that email.
You
But-
can ask your client that. I would object to
Well-
badgering with a witness and inappropriate examination. She said that was not the email, so we'd ask for appropriate questions.
Do you have the email? I'm going to ask you that. Do you have the email?
Is it in here?
If you don't, that's fine.
I don't know if it got submitted in
All
here.
right. If you had the email, would you have shown it to Mrs. Souter?
Yes.
Okay. And then you would probably have it in the notebook since you have another email that has it on there with a different date. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. You referred to an earlier association with Ms. Souter, where it apparently wasn't bad because you said approximately 3 years ago, or at the third year or something like that, things started to change. Is that a correct statement? Where did you notice, or when did you notice that there was some deterioration in what you perceived as her performance?
I started receiving phone calls from parents.
When, I say?
I don't have an exact date, but I would say probably her second or third year in.
What year would that be?
The 13-14 school year, perhaps.
Okay, is there anything documented 13-14 school year that actually speaks to the issue of this not natural interaction that you referred to?
Anytime that I received,
No, go ahead. I'm just trying to listen to your words.
anytime that I received a phone call from a parent or a complaint, we would have had a discussion, and then I would have followed it up with an email to Mrs. Souter.
But do you have those emails?
No, because this has to do with the last year.
But what I'm
But I
trying to-
do have. I do.
I
They're
know.
all in her file. But this is from
No,
the last year. That's what they told us to present.
Okay.
That we weren't focusing on the past. We were focusing on the past year.
If it doesn't exist in her file, then it doesn't exist. Is that what you're saying?
We
Just
were.
object to foundation.
Okay.
What if you know?
Foundation.
If you know.
If I
So
know
there's,
what.
there's in it.
If
If he asks if she knows, that's fine. That'll satisfy.
Okay.
Okay. The only thing I'm trying to figure out, and unfortunately I don't have specifics, and I just want to know, what were the problems? How are they documented? How are they brought to her
They
attention?
were brought to her attention through discussion and email. The problems were that she was talking to students, talking down to students, saying interrogating students, saying inappropriate things, and so I was discussing with them and emailed them to her.
And you-
And then I called her supervisor, and then it was discussed.
And you documented it, you believe? You documented it, but email?
Correct.
Okay. But you didn't keep a copy of that email?
I did keep a copy in a file.
Is there anywhere in all the information we have here, except for your testimony, is there any documentation of those emails that you had a problem that reflect the problems that you had with Ms. Souter in 2013, 2014?
This is based on no. This
Okay.
is based on what's happened
Okay.
for the
So
for the
your earlier
intervention.
testimony doesn't have really anything to do with why we're here tonight. Is that what you're saying? Because what I'm trying to do is figure out why this fell apart. And you went into great detail as to things fell apart, and I had this problem, I had that problem. And you say there's documentation, but I can't show the board where it is. I can't even look at it myself.
You just asked me if there was
I'm just
previous
gonna
stuff.
I'm going to object to the questioning.
So-
We've presented many documents. I just
Yeah.
went through in detail from the 15, 16 years. So I just, object to the characterization since we
Well,
just went through
I should have
lots of
objected to the testimony.
There are things from 13, 14, and 15, 16 in
But-
here, so.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Is there anything in there that shows problem with the interaction, the
Yes.
joyful interaction in 13, 14? An email or something that would document that? Because you say you kept emails.
No, the employee
Okay.
consultations are
Okay.
in here.
All
Yes,
right.
we did not submit those. The employee consultations are in here. We did not submit the emails, no.
Okay. So if you misstated or mistakenly put down the wrong date, you'd never be able to confirm that's the right date, would you?
I don't understand your question, so I'm not going to answer it. I apologize.
You say you put everything into the document, but without the email, I'm not quite sure why I can know or I can tell my client that, yes, there is evidence that you did say it on that particular date. All we have is an email that's from a different date. So I'm just trying to figure out how do you
I'm just
So-
really here about this and I guess I'm
nothing
just,
earlier.
there was a great deal,
But
yes.
you don't have it
But I'm
here.
here about this, what we're talking about here, so.
But the earlier led to what you call this. Is that correct? Because
You just asked if there were things
No,
before, and
know
I said
you-
there
well,
were
your
signs.
testimony was that it started out and there were problems, then it got to the point of informal intervention, then the point of formal
that's why
intervention.
we're here.
So we've got a lot of talking over
Yeah.
each other, and it's
Sorry.
becoming very challenging. So
I'm
let's
sorry.
try to
Yeah.
let's try to move on, and let's try to not talk over each other. It's very hard for our court reporter.
Okay, just one last question. I have nothing here, or you have nothing here to show to me as to any problem that existed in 2013, 2014, except your testimony, but there's no documentation that it actually exists.
There are employee consultations in here.
I know.
Yes.
But there's not the actual email. This is transcribed from information you have and put into the document.
They were created into employee consultations, yes. Correct.
But the email doesn't exist that you got the information from. Is that correct?
Are the Lizda's emails in here? The Robbie Lizda email?
He just asked if it exists.
Yes, it does exist, and I believe that email is in here.
Okay.
I think we submitted one of the emails,
Oh.
for example. Correct.
And your testimony is that 130 is not that email.
No, that's
Exhibit.
on the backpack program.
I'm sorry. I want to look at 130. I'm just trying to understand the way things were collected.
I don't understand the question. I don't understand what he's asking.
Okay, that's, yes, we're still back at Exhibit 102. The date in Exhibit 102 on the page that says she's made these statements during the plan of intervention. I've asked if you have any emails. You said no, but they're in here. And the only email that's in here is Exhibit 130, and it is from a date that is prior to the plan of intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you know whether a parent has ever gotten upset with you and asked to specifically speak with Mrs. Souter about some counseling issue?
I'm sure that's happened. I mean, I don't know specifically, but
Okay.
that would make sense, that those things happen in every building.
So it's not that unusual for a parent to get upset about something that a teacher or
No.
administrator's done?
No.
I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to do that. Would you look at Exhibit 173? Was your testimony that for the food program, the backpack program, the name should not be on the in an area where the other students can see it to either take their name off or put their name on? And I guess what I'm asking you is, I'm trying to understand where you're saying that you did not want to have names posted on a board so students would see who is getting the food from the backpack program, because it might be offensive and humiliating. Is that correct? Wasn't that your testimony?
That's what the food bank wants, yes.
But is that your testimony too? That you don't want the names posted on a board where somebody would have to come in and take their name off or put their name on?
When you say somebody,
Well, the
you
student
don't
is
want
receiving,
the students, correct?
Okay. The student that's receiving it.
Correct.
Okay.
You don't, yes.
And that is something that you think Mrs. Souter did?
Yes.
Okay. What are they? Some sort of cards, or what were they? How was it designated that you recall that you objected to, that Mrs. Souter posted or put up on boards, the names or whatever? How was it done?
A clipboard with the list.
Okay, were there cards or something of that nature? Do you know?
You'll need to
No,
respond.
sorry.
Do you know whether cards have been used by Mrs. Souter?
I know that she was provided different photos about ideas with cards.
What kind of ideas? What would be acceptable to place on a board to identify the kids that are going to get the particular backpack benefit?
Well, there's lots of things that can be acceptable with ideas and cards. It depends on how the students are receiving the backpack. So if they come in like, a few students at a time with an adult, it just depends on how the students are coming in. But there's a myriad of ways that this can happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's examples and different things that can happen.
Well, would you take a look at Exhibit 173?
Yes, I've seen these. I've seen these because
Okay.
these were provided to her by.
Okay. Well, what is the backpack card page on?
I've seen these. I've seen these ideas that were provided to her.
How is this acceptable? These cards on the wall that say backpack cards on them. In your opinion?
I haven't seen this run. Yeah, I'm sure this could be acceptable if that was doing it in a manner for that building. I can't answer this because I haven't seen this running, and I don't know how this building did it. I'm sure this building did this in an ethical, confidential manner. If this was something that our
But you have not seen
supervisor
it, right?
did this, I sent it to her. No, I haven't.
You're
seen this.
assuming that was done. Well, I'm
Sure,
sorry.
absolutely. I'm sorry.
Finish answering
Sure,
your question.
sure.
You're assuming that it was done properly. Is that correct? But you don't know that it was. You are assuming because you haven't seen it. Is that correct?
What I'm going to tell you is
Okay.
this was sent to her as an exhibit of a good example from the district. If a supervisor from the counseling department from OPS sent her this as a good example and gave her strategies, then I am going to, in good nature, hope that it is something that she could do.
All right. You're going to hope, but you don't know because you don't know whether or not it would.
I trust in our counseling department for OPS, yes.
Okay, but you've not seen it.
No, I have not seen this, and this
All
did
right,
not get
thank you.
implemented in our department, in our school.
But it was an example that she could follow. That's what you were
She
saying.
never followed
But
that
she
example.
could have followed because it was given as an example. Is that correct?
It's a moot point, she didn't do it.
No, it's not a moot point. Would you approve of the way it was done? Because you didn't approve of the way she did it before. And I'm trying to figure out how this is different or similar.
It's different if it was done in a confidential manner.
But you don't know that it was, so and we'll leave it at that, okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask you to look at Exhibit 104.
Okay.
And I believe it is the first page I'm asking you to look at. And you went through some of these concerns that you had and why you thought they were inappropriate. One of them was took the initiative to divide a teacher's classroom when the teacher requested to leave the building, again without the knowledge and approval of administration. You believe that occurred, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would you please take a look at Exhibit 17 in this particular grouping? I'll grab it. Do you know who Tracy Monroe is?
Is that
Yes.
Well, Tracy Monroe is the person whose class was allegedly divided by Mrs. Souter. And her statement here, have you read it?
No, I've never seen this.
Okay, would you please read it?
Sure. It says the Gilder Elementary counselor Judy Souter never. The Gilder Elementary counselor Judy Souter never split my class for any of my sub days off. I had several boys in my class that refused often to go to several of the school specials, such as art, library guidance, and sometimes music. These boys regularly started to struggle with their behavior by later afternoon, before, or specials. If these boys didn't go to our specials, they went to front office to be monitored by the security office ladies, security office ladies or administration. There were also times that the pack room person would work with them and monitor them in the pack room.
And the most important part of this particular document is the language that Mrs. Souter never split her class. And you saw that, right?
I did.
So that is incorrect on 104, at the very least, isn't it?
No, it is not. She split that classroom up. This was, I'm going to tell you, she split that classroom up.
Okay. Despite the fact that the teacher says she never did. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah. That's her friend. Mm-hmm. That's her friend. Yeah.
It's important, I think, your testimony is, and don't help me if I misunderstood your testimony, to be very supportive of the person that is the subject of a plan of intervention, whether it be formal or informal.
Yes. Yes.
And you provide assistance in any and all manners that you can. And just say yes. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yes.
If the teacher asks for something, would that be something that the teacher would likely receive if it was within your power to do something to help the teacher, or ask someone to help the teacher? I'm asking if the teacher were to ask for some sort of accommodation or some sort of information, would you do, or would you ask that someone do that you have supervisory control over? Try to do that for Mrs. Souter or the teacher.
Yes, I would hope so.
Okay. I'm going to try for another exhibit.
How about can we just do a point of order here on the record? Can we just have you lay foundation and do it like you would in a courtroom so it's easier? Okay.
Right, I think I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Let's lay the foundation before we pass the document.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm handing you what has been marked as Exhibit 29. Are you familiar with that particular document?
Can you go ahead and say that into the mic,
Yes.
please?
I'm handing you what has been marked as Exhibit 29. Would you please take a moment to review it and see if you can identify that document? Is that yes?
I need to read through it.
Oh, okay, I'm
first.
sorry. I thought you said, uh-huh.
Yes, I know what this is.
All right. Would you read what Exhibit 29, well, before I ask you to read it.
Yes.
I'm going to offer Exhibit 29.
Yes. So,
No well, wait, no objections? Okay, so at this time, I need to have a motion from the board to accept Exhibit 29.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
So motion by Mr. Wayne, second by Ms. Merrick to accept Exhibit 29. Roll call,
what do you want me to
please.
do? Read it?
Snow.
I don't.
No.
I'm not reading. Oh, he's reading. Okay. Am I talking?
Vargas.
Okay.
Aye.
Wayne.
Aye.
Fay.
Aye.
Goding.
Aye.
America.
Aye.
5 aye, 1 no.
Okay, motion carries, and I will distribute these to the Board of Education.
Have they been distributed so I can ask a question now?
Yeah. I'll have that one.
Would you please
Yeah.
state what is on Exhibit 29?
Yes, what this is about is our.
Would you please read it so then
Oh,
you can tell
sure.
me what it's about?
Sure. So, Mrs. Souter, do you want me to talk about it?
No, just go ahead and
Okay.
read it so then we can.
And then I'll get to discuss
Mhm,
it?
mhm.
Okay, great. So, I'm telling,
What does it say?
yes, I would love to read it. Be careful what you help her with. Don't do anything for her. Just tell her what to do, like instructions. Don't sit with her or find them. She needs to do things on her own, and it's very important we know what she can do. Don't write down the steps for her either. Also, you could say, I'm an available day or this week. I could help you next week or the following. She has deadlines. She's not meeting. This is her last week. Do not stay late with her. Seriously, Anne, she has done nothing on her own. The biggest aspect of this is that she was not doing her own data collection, and we needed to know that she could find this data about students on her own. A big piece of the school counseling plan is that counselors can get in and find data. Kathy Solomon, as one of the school supervisors, had explained this. She had gone over this with her. She had gone through this with her. She had sent her the steps. Nancy Bond had gone through this with her, and we had gone through this with her as a school support. Our instructional facilitator had gone through this with her early in the year. As you can see this is April. She had not done this still. She had not done these supports on her own. And again, what she's asking for is the instructional facilitator to pull all this data for her, all of it, and do it for her. That is not the job of the instructional facilitator to pull all this data for her. Will the instructional facilitator do this? She can do this. She can do this for new teachers. She can do this for teachers and help them with this. But this is something that she should be experienced with. We ask that she knows how to do this. And the problem is we need to know, can she do this? Is she experienced with this? And if she cannot do this, I need to know if she can do this. And if she's having her pull all this data, she was supposed to be doing this the entire informal, she still wasn't able to do it, then she was supposed to be doing it throughout the formal 6 weeks. And she was waiting till the last week of the formal to get all this data. That's a problem for me. That was a huge problem. So the fact that she was having her do it the very last week and asking her to pull all the data, that made me angry. That made me really angry. And so you're right, I sent that. I said, you don't need to help her with it. If you want to sit down with her, that's fine. But I didn't want our instructional facilitator feel like she was obligated.
Does the instructional facilitator say, I'd be happy to meet with you regarding any scores that you might need? Please let me know.
She did say it.
Okay, but you don't think she should have to because she's willing to do it?
She did. I wanted her to feel like she's not obligated.
So is that consistent with your testimony that you wanted everybody to help in any way they could if it would help Ms. Souter satisfy her intervention plans?
I want Ms. Souter, if she wants, throughout the plan, we were there as resources, but we are not going to do the plan for her. And that was an objective for her to do it for her plan. And that our goal is not to do the plan for her.
This isn't the plan, is it? This is just to get information?
She needed to collect data.
Yeah, but I mean, is this the plan or is this information that she is
She needed
requested?
to collect data for the plan.
Okay, yeah, but this isn't the plan. I'm just asking. Well, this isn't the plan she's asking somebody else to do, is it?
She's asking to collect data for the plan.
Yeah, data, right?
That's what she's asking for, and she had to get the data for the plan.
When you got this, did you talk to Ms. Souter about it? Say, look, I want you to do this. I don't want you to have anybody help you.
No.
In fact, your statement says don't do anything for her.
This instructional facilitator was not on our plan, so she didn't have to. And I said she could, but she didn't have to. So that's what that says in that email.
Has Exhibit 17 been offered?
Yes, it was part of your
Okay.
original offering.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Ms. Gutierrez-Fox, would you like to follow up with any further questions?
Just have a couple quick questions. Mr. Wade asked you at the beginning about the attendance team, and can you tell me why Ms. Souter was no longer on the attendance team?
The previous year, the assistant principal and I had a discussion about the attendance team, and we had just had a conversation about the fact that we had just the issue with the suspension, and we had the issue with her kind of having those inappropriate conversations with students, and we just felt like he kind of served at that better role with being the lead on that situation and the attendance secretary, and it would make a better opportunity for him to be in that role. And the following year we had an SSL, School Support Liaison, and they do that role where they go in and they work that role really well. So the School Support Liaison and the attendance secretary were that team.
Okay. And if you want to turn to Exhibit 31,
Mhm.
or I'm sorry, 131 in the book.
131?
131. We
Okay.
kind of rushed through it. So all of the incidents described in 131, these were incidents that you wrote down that occurred during the formal intervention time period, correct?
Sure.
Okay. And one incident I wanted to talk about is on the first page, the third box down.
Okay.
And
Yes.
could you read? Could you actually read that into
Yes.
the record for me slowly?
Yes. Kindergarten class guide
First of all, what date is this? Sorry.
2/5/16.
Okay.
Kindergarten class guidance is held from 2:20 to 3:10. On this particular day, the Gilder was having an all-school monthly character counts assembly at 3:05, and the kindergarten teacher asked if they could have class end a few minutes early so they wouldn't be late to the assembly. Mrs. Souter said that would be fine. When it was 3, the para requested that they line up for the assembly.
However, a student was in the restroom, so the para asked Miss Souter if she would mind waiting with the student, and the para would take the rest of the class to the assembly. The plan was for Miss Souter to bring the remaining student to the assembly. When the para got to the assembly, she noticed Mrs. Souter shortly behind her group without the student. She immediately went up to Mrs. Souter, asking about the student left in the restroom. And Mrs. Souter acted as if she had no recollection of their conversation at first. And then with some prompting from the para, she said, "Oh yeah, that's right." Mrs. Souter then gave her cottage room keys to the para for her to go back to get the student. When the para got there, the kindergarten child was left in the dark, locked cottage all alone. Mrs. Souter never checked up with the teacher, the para, or the child to see if the situation was resolved.
Is that kind of behavior at all in line with what you would expect for a school counselor?
I wouldn't expect that from any educator.
I don't have any other questions.
Mr. Wade, do you have any follow-up questions?
No further.
Okay. At this time, I would ask Board of Education members if they have questions for Ms. Kathy Schmidt. I have one. I believe it's Exhibit 122. Is this, and I'm familiar with the Backtrack program, and I'm familiar with the confidentiality of it. And I'm familiar with the confidentiality aspect that you were talking to before. Is this an example of an email related to no supervision and the students crossing off the number and seeing other students' names that you were referring to earlier?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarification on that. Do any other board members have questions? Mrs. Fay.
I just want to clarify that Mrs. Souter was at Gilder for 2 years before you started noticing, and you started your, what you referred to as conversations, and before you got into the informal and then the formal intervention process, you had not noticed some of these behaviors in the first 2 years, or you didn't take action until the third year?
The second year, I think I would say there was maybe a few phone calls from parents, just some concerns. Like she said, she asked my student, "Why were you late? Why weren't you at school yesterday? Where were you yesterday? Why? Those sorts of those types of questions." And the parent was upset about those, and so just diffusing those kinds of conversations. And so, and the questions about, did you shower? Did you, those kinds of conversations. And so those were trickling in. The third year is when the things started happening where maybe covering a classroom and or those pieces. But
Okay, so you noticed a change in behavior, and this is so I'm sure I have the timeline. This is not your Mrs. Souter's employment at Gilder didn't start. You were there a few years prior to her coming.
Correct.
Okay, so you'd been a principal for
Correct.
probably about 4 or 5 years with other school
Yes.
counselors
Yes.
there before.
Yes.
Okay,
Correct.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
All right, thank you very much. I don't think we have any other questions. Do you have another? I guess I would ask, do you want to continue to sequester this witness?
Yes, I think we will. But so she
And
can
I'm-
be released.
And do you have any other questions after
I
we
do not.
finished? Mr. Wade, do you have any other questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
And so you will stay sequestered as a witness until we complete
Okay.
the entirety of this hearing. All right.
Okay.
Your next witness
Yes.
is?
Dr. Nancy Bond. She is the, let me find the formal title, School Counseling Supervisor. We got to switch to keep Vicki happy over there.
Okay, can you please state for the record your name?
I'm sorry.
Can you please state for the record your name?
Sure, my name is Nancy Bond.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, at this time, I would call on Ms. McHugh to enter into questions.
All right, Dr. Bond, can you state your current position with OPS?
Sure. I'm currently the school counseling supervisor.
And how long have you been in that position?
This is my 11th year in that role.
And how long have you worked for OPS?
This is my 33rd year in the district.
Can you tell the board a little bit about your previous positions?
I've had a number of positions in the district. I've been a counselor at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. I've worked as an assistant principal at North High School. I have been a member of the Human Community Relations Department. At one time, I was a member of the Student Personnel Services Department, and then accepted my current position.
And can you briefly describe your educational background?
Sure. My educational teaching certificate is in social sciences. My master's is in school counseling. K-12 are my endorsements. My administrative endorsements are also K-12, and then I have a doctorate in educational leadership.
And describe your responsibilities in your current position.
My responsibilities currently are to oversee the school counseling program, which includes supervising the, with the support certainly of building principals, but providing input, professional development, and overseeing the work of our counselors K-12.
So you regularly interact with school counselors in your position?
I do.
Can you tell the board a little bit about your expectations for school counselors?
I think the fundamental expectation in our district is that we recognize that school counseling is a helping profession, and when we consider the expectations, we look at what is typically considered helpful. How do we deliver a program that can support students in developing their academic, their career, their social emotional needs, and we do that in a number of ways in terms of the actual service delivery. Counselors provide school counseling lessons and are regularly in the classroom to deliver them. Counselors provide what we consider individual student planning. That's the goal setting. That's the individual responses that we provide to students to meet their specific needs around academic, career, and social emotional development. And then we also provide what we call responsive services. And those are those services that are provided as a result of needs that present themselves on a daily basis. They're more reactive in nature than our counseling lessons, which are certainly more proactive. And so we expect that counselors will respond to needs that arise, and certainly that those needs are presented in a wide array of areas. And so we hope that and expect that counselors will adequately support students as needs are presented.
Do you know Judy Souter?
I do know Judy Souter.
How long have you known her?
I have known her since I think I knew Judy I was previously an elementary counselor, and so I knew her even prior to taking this position. So certainly the 11 years I've held this position, but I would imagine a couple of years prior to that as well.
Are you aware that she was placed on an informal and formal intervention plan?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
How did you become aware of that?
Actually, when I had some communication with Judy during a couple of opportunities to talk with her about some performance concerns that had been addressed. And I believe even at that time we had talked about the need to see some improvement in regard to some of those concerns, and that, I remember explaining that an informal plan of assistance might be something that we look at to provide some additional assistance to her.
Okay, so before we get into details about Mrs. Souter, I want to just have you talk generally about the intervention process. Are you familiar with the district's intervention process?
And you're referring to simply to the an informal plan of assistance, and if we don't see the improvement in terms of a level of appropriate proficiency, that we would then look at a formal intervention process to again more formally and more specifically address concerns.
Do you know approximately how long the informal intervention process lasts?
It was 6 or 7 weeks.
And you just mentioned that if an individual doesn't successfully complete that, they move on to the formal process. Do you know approximately how long the formal process lasts?
I would imagine in general it would be a 6 to 8 week process. But certainly the hope is that with the interventions and the support that you provide during the informal process, that you see those improvements at that time.
Okay, turning to when you started seeing issues with Mrs. Souter, I want to talk about just a few incidents. If you could turn to Exhibit 104, please. And I'll give you just a minute to look over that. Is this an employee consultation conference that you held with Ms. Souter?
Yes, it is.
And who was present at that conference?
Cassie Schmidt, myself, Judy Souter. I do not recall. I do not recall the OEA representation, but I couldn't speak to that specifically.
So was this before Ms. Souter's informal intervention began?
Yes.
Can you tell the board a little bit about why you held this consultation conference?
There were a number of events that occurred as outlined on the employee consultation conference. Certainly those events, making a decision to the word is suspend, but certainly she did not actually suspend a student since that's completely outside of the scope of a counselor. But sending a student home as a result of an action would not be a typical conduct for a counselor. Likewise, contacting a parent as a result of behavior that occurred without having consultation with an administrator would be of concern. Certainly, if a student was expressing any sort of suicidal ideation, the expectation that we definitively hold is that a parent would always be contacted with any level of suicidal ideation. And then, changing her schedule to allow a teacher to leave early. Certainly, counselors change their schedule for a variety of reasons, not necessarily to provide coverage for a teacher in the classroom.
Okay, can you turn to Exhibit 109? Is this an observation record from a day in which you observed Ms. Souter's class?
I went to the building to observe Mrs. Souter's class, but when I arrived, I learned that the counseling lessons were not taking place as they had been scheduled to be. Apparently, she reported to me that the students had been on a field trip, and when they returned, the teacher had said they were too tired, so counseling lessons weren't held.
So you mentioned in this record the weekend food backpacks. Can you talk to the board about what you're describing here?
Many of our schools take advantage of a partnership with the Omaha Food Bank and provide weekend opportunities for their children to have food through their backpack programs. One of the things that we really want to emphasize at all times is the sensitive nature of a student's socioeconomic status. And I was concerned that as students came to the classroom, they came in mass, they recognized each other, they knew who else was receiving that assistance. If students choose to share that information with another student, but typically I would want there to be greater confidentiality, that students be given that assistance privately and not be involved in a system that eliminates any confidentiality for a student.
And did you discuss that concern with Mrs. Souter?
Yes, I did.
So I want to move on then to Mrs. Souter's intervention. Do you know when she was placed on the informal intervention?
Informal intervention occurred, let's see.
And we can refer you to an exhibit if that's helpful with dates.
That would be helpful.
If you want to turn to Exhibit 101. If you'll look at the first paragraph, it will explain.
Thank you. I was going to be off. I was going to say November, but it was actually the very beginning of December, so I'm glad you referred me. Thank you. So yes, from early December until late January was informal intervention.
And can you just tell the board why generally she was placed on the informal intervention process?
When we looked at just really trying to ascertain overall, rather than looking, we had discussed a number of concerns through employee consultation conferences, and we just felt that as we looked at performance overall, there were a number of concerns that aligned with our performance appraisal, and felt it was a more comprehensive approach to take in terms of providing the support that we felt was necessary. We felt that there were many situations that aligned with simply professionalism as it related to the lack of confidentiality that I just spoke of, and some other concerns. And so we just felt that an informal intervention plan might be a more comprehensive approach to address a number of areas of concern.
So you mentioned the informal intervention plan. If you turn to Exhibit 117. Is this the plan that you were just describing?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain the purpose of this written plan?
The purpose was to clearly communicate the deficiencies that we identified, and then to clearly communicate the expectations, the types of performance that we wanted to see. We tried to identify priority areas, and so we looked at competencies that we really wanted to focus on, and then also communicated, our plans for addressing each of those competencies.
You mentioned the primary deficiencies. Can you walk through the deficiencies on this plan and explain why Mrs. Souter was deficient in these particular areas?
Okay. The first one, in terms of the first competency relative to professionalism, we identified the modeling of professional ethics. We identified developing positive rapport with students, staff, and parents. We identified utilizing effective communication and not consistently demonstrating good judgment. One of the primary tenets of the standards of ethics for school counselors is confidentiality. And when I try to convey how important those ethics and ethical behavior is, I don't know that there is a singular item that I feel is more critical for a school counselor than to uphold confidentiality. So that would be one example. I have been concerned about the rapport that Mrs. Souter has with students, staff, and parents. That has been a concern in terms of simply the fundamental persona of a counselor. We want someone who is able to build relationships, someone who communicates warmly, demonstrates empathy, just fundamental qualities in a school counselor. And I wanted that to be something that she prioritized and felt was as important as I, as her supervisor, did. I really think that even something as fundamental as a smile, and while we may think that that's it's not a critical skill, but it's very fundamental in developing rapport and establishing relationships, and simply that communication of acceptance universally. So we did have conversation about that as well. Effective communication, I think, is very similar. Just being able to communicate effectively and be understood well by those that she serves. And then there were incidences that we recounted earlier on the employee consultation document that indicated some questions relative to her use of good judgment. So those would be examples I would give there. We wanted to ensure that she was consistently addressing the stated student competencies and implementing activities to achieve those competencies. Counselors are only with students 30 minutes each week, and so there is that expectation in a classroom setting, I should clarify. And there is that expectation that in addition to providing a school counseling curriculum, that there are supplemental activities that happen as well. There are career fairs, there are opportunities for students to enjoy greater career awareness and other opportunities outside of that classroom setting. So we wanted to emphasize the importance of that so that we were looking at a full comprehensive program. Individual student planning would include things like offering small group guidance activities and utilizing student data to identify what those groups might need to entail. And so those were a couple of items that we felt needed to improve. There were no small groups happening at the time, and Mrs. Souter was heavily dependent on our office to provide some of the data that we felt she could benefit from using in the building. So we wanted to improve those skills as well. Then responsive services, I think I spoke to earlier, in terms of being able to respond quickly and appropriately to requests, whether that be from students or staff or parents, ensuring that she was using counseling activities and techniques that were appropriate for the needs that were addressed. And then ensuring that there was some consultation that was happening if others in the building needed additional support.
So you also mentioned the support that was provided to Ms. Souter during the informal process. Can you describe the kinds of support that was provided to her?
There were a number of opportunities to meet. We provided some very fundamental literature that we thought that would be helpful. We provided classroom observations. We encouraged her to also observe others so that she could benefit from some peer coaching as well.
And if you turn to page 3 of the plan, there's a section that's titled Assistance and Resources. Can you just go over some of the items in this section?
Sure. The School Counseling Handbook is a binder of resources that we think are they're modeled after the American School Counseling Association resources, and it really speaks to providing a comprehensive school counseling program. There are a number of items there specific to school counseling, but also that would be pertinent to other areas of knowledge around the district. So that's a wonderful resource that we have available to counselors to ensure that they have access in terms of a reference for materials that will be beneficial. We also provided some professional articles to her. I want to say one of them may have been one that appeared in the Ask a School Journal that was simply about establishing. the American School Counseling Association professional journal. And some additional professional reading, our second step curriculum, and then our OPS school counseling curriculum as well.
And there are several individuals' names who are listed in this section. Were these individuals serving as support for her?
Yes.
Can you list off those individuals?
Mrs. Kathy Schmidt, the principal at Gilder Elementary, myself, Ms. Abby Vilchek, the school support liaison, and Dr. Kathy Solomon, who is our elementary school counseling lead.
Can you describe your observations of how Mrs. Souter progressed through the informal intervention process?
We didn't feel, in my observation, I didn't feel as though there was a great deal of change during that process. I felt that we were having conversation, we were providing resources that might help with the understanding of the areas in which we wanted to see improvement. My thought at the time, and I believe I communicated this to her, was that I wasn't sure if she was really trying to take the assistance to heart. I was really concerned that we were kind of moving through the plan, but I really wasn't seeing the improvements that we were hoping for.
So when you didn't see the improvements, was that when she was moved on to the formal intervention plan?
Yes, that's when a decision was made to move to formal.
And if you go back to Exhibit 101, can you just tell us the dates of the formal intervention plan?
The plan was conducted from February 23rd, 2016 to April 15th, 2016.
So approximately 7 weeks.
And I do, I want to note that we did actually extend it. Those were the weeks that were identified, and then we actually extended it at Mrs. Souter's request in order to try to complete some of the tasks and some of the learnings that we had prepared.
Did Mrs. Souter also have a written plan for the formal intervention?
Yes, she did.
Can you turn to Exhibit 112? Is this exhibit Mrs. Souter's formal intervention plan?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain the purpose of this plan to the board?
Essentially, we were looking at identifying concerns, areas that we were not identifying as proficient, and working to help her gain or regain professional expertise and competence.
And if you turn to the second page, can you walk through the deficiencies that were noted as the formal plan was beginning?
We tried to identify the areas, and we tried to have greater focus so that we were looking at fewer areas of concern. So we did focus on professionalism, and some of these were repeated from the informal. And so we looked at professional ethics and developing positive rapport, utilizing effective communication skills, and demonstrating good judgment. We also looked at competency 2, the delivery of the school counseling curriculum, as well as competency 4, the responsive services.
And when it came to the informal plan and the formal plan, did you meet with Mrs. Souter and discuss both of those plans with her?
Absolutely.
And as far as the formal plan went, what kinds of support was Mrs. Souter receiving during that formal plan?
Again, we looked at a variety of observations, so there were multiple and varied observations in terms of the types of things that were observed, as well as the observers. We continued to believe that professional readings might be one way of increasing her knowledge and skills. And so we looked at Rick Smith's book, Conscious Classroom Management, which is used widely in the district to support classroom management. We also asked her to review an article published by the NEA on developing relationships. There was an extensive email sent from our office that was designed to assist her in identifying ways that she might better organize her classroom space. We've reviewed the Best Instructional Practices Handbook for the value that it provides. The principal reviewed and provided feedback on our lesson plans. So we felt that there were a number. We met weekly to discuss the plan and any questions that she had related to it, and to review the work that she was doing with individual students and in groups.
So you briefly mentioned the individuals who were observing her classroom. Can you name the individuals that you know observed the classroom?
In addition to myself, and are you speaking of informal and during formal intervention, or are you speaking solely about formal?
During formal intervention.
During formal intervention. Myself, Mrs. Cassie Schmidt, the principal, Mrs. Nanette Beller, one of our other principals in the district, and Mrs. Brianna Larson, also another principal in the district.
For Mrs. Beller and Mrs. Larson, how did you select those two individuals?
I don't know specifically. There was a discussion of principals who may have observed effective counseling. In Mrs. Larson's case, she actually was a former counselor in our district and has a very good understanding of the role of a school counselor.
Were you trying to select neutral parties in this instance?
Absolutely. Neutral parties who would come with an eye for the counselor's role at delivering school counseling lessons.
Is it normal to attempt to select neutral parties, or was that a request made by Mrs. Souter?
I don't have a normal in this situation, but I would anticipate that one would want someone who's going to be helpful and knowledgeable.
Okay, so you mentioned that you, during the formal intervention process, met frequently with Mrs. Souter. I just want to talk a little bit about each of those meetings, so to walk through the exhibits that explain what happened during those meetings. If you turn to Exhibit 168, the last few pages of it.
My apologies.
It says Souter Timeline for Improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Are these notes from one of the weekly meetings during that intervention process?
Yes, this would be from week 1.
Can you describe some of your observations from that first week?
Okay, well, the objective that week was we were looking at professionalism and modeling professional ethics, good communication, demonstrating friendly and demonstrating general warmth, caring, and respect. The first item refers to the concern related to when the school counseling plan was actually received, much later than when we would expect it to have been submitted in September. There were some inaccuracies on the plan in terms of her involvement. The plan is a description of the school counseling activities that occur, and that was not accurately depicted on the plan. There were concerns about the resources that would be available to parents. Certainly that's a very fundamental way counselors can be supportive to our parents and our families, to provide resources when they have questions about needs that their students have. And so we always would anticipate that open house week, parent-teacher conferences, those are those times when we want to make certain that we have resources available. And so that was a concern, that we didn't see that as we had hoped. We had asked her to target 5 families just to include and make sure that she had communication with. she did not indicate that there were any meetings or any contact with families during that time.
So turning next to Exhibit 176. Are these also notes from one of the weekly meetings?
Yes, these will be the notes from the next week, week 2.
So I'll just direct you to the paragraph marked procedures. Can you explain the issue that you noted here?
We were looking to support her in terms of her interactions with students, staff, and families, and what we identified is that many of the students being supported on her contact log were students from her classroom lessons that maybe had a concern in terms of their behavior within a lesson. I would have anticipated that the students we would have been seeing might have been students who were seeking out her assistance with a concern, or parents who were seeking out her assistance, not simply students who may have not acted appropriately in a classroom setting.
Do school counselors in the district normally keep contact logs?
Yes, we typically do that within Infinite Campus, but for the ease of communication for this process, we ask that it be done on paper.
And what do you expect from other counselors in the district as far as what you would see on that contact log?
As I had mentioned, any contacts that they would have in terms of communication that they had received and interventions that might have been put in place as it relates to student needs.
Okay, if you can turn to Exhibit 177. Are these notes from another meeting during the formal intervention?
Yes, these are notes from week 3.
So I'll direct you to number 2 here. Can you explain what you observed in this situation?
Mrs. Souter and I went to Field Club Elementary to observe a counselor there, and the counselor regularly, as we would want all counselors to do, infuses messages about students' futures. We want students to recognize that the reason that we're providing support around academic, career, and social emotional development skills is to prepare them for their future and to prepare them for college, career, and life beyond these walls. And so we wanted to have her observe that lesson to see the kinds of messaging that should be happening every time counselors are in communication with students, that we always want to be referring to their future. And when we left, Mrs. Souter made the comment, "That's what I do." And I don't have any references in my observations of Mrs. Souter specifically talking or mentioning, messaging students about college or career. And it's sort of the essence of what we want to prepare students for.
Okay, if you can turn to Exhibit 178. Are these notes from one of the weekly meetings during the formal intervention process?
Yes, these notes are from week 4.
If you can refer to number 1 on this page, can you describe the issues that you noted here?
What I was hoping to find in this situation was a list of evidence-based ideas, possible Tier 2 interventions, and Tier 2 interventions simply being those supports that we would put in place when we recognize that a student hasn't gained a particular skill, something that we needed to reteach, or a support that a student needed. It might be that a student that was not achieving academically might need to check in and check out with the counselor on a daily or an every other day basis. There are some models out there that have been researched and found to be highly effective. I was hoping to see some of those types of interventions listed, or even lists of additional print resources that could have been referenced.
Okay, can you turn to Exhibit 179? Are these also notes from one of the weekly meetings during the formal intervention process?
Yes, these are the notes from week 5.
If you can refer to number 1 on the page, can you explain the issues that you noted here?
On this day, I had gone to the building to meet with Mrs. Souter. It was our regularly scheduled conference, but I went early according to her schedule because I could see that she was going to have a small group at that time. I went to the classroom where the small group was to be held, and I learned that she wasn't at the building. And she did arrive soon after, in time for our scheduled weekly conference, but while she had contacted Subfinder, no one in the building had realized that she was going to be absent at that time.
Can you turn to Exhibit 180?
I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt really quickly. Can counsel for both sides tell us approximately how much longer you think you've each got? Mr. Wade, I'm sorry.
I think it's going to be several hours.
You've got several hours.
I mean, I think it will be several hours by the time I get done with my evidence and the fact that I think they have a couple witnesses.
Okay. I know our calendar invite went to 8 o'clock, so I just was trying to figure that out. I think we have a member that needs to leave, and so I think I have a board member.
I thought it was till 6 o'clock today.
So the calendar invite said 8 p.m. So can we take a short recess? I'm sorry.
45 minutes?
45 minutes to go, and you're thinking several hours.
But
Can I?
I can tell you right now, I have questions possibly for the last witness and this witness, so we'll have to recall the other witness, maybe, depending on how.
And you have questions for previous witnesses?
Depending on how, I don't know how this goes. I might, just the previous, the Gilder principle.
All right. So do we have one board member that needs to leave? I need 5 here.
Yes. So can we take a quick recess and figure this
So
out?
if we can take 5-minute recess, and we'll be back for the court reporter.
I thought it was-
Sorry.
You're going to have to go through all these things too, so it's going to take an hour and a half, 2 hours for you. Oh, no, it always bothers me. I appreciate you. No, it does, though. It would be worse probably the time.
No, I think this is good. And then ask you about some specific examples after we go through all of these. There will be some pain something to get through them, but we'll go through a couple of the consultation comments. something.
No, it's on. So there's no way to determine what line would be, so. No, no. Has it seemed,
Okay, at this time, we would like to take a recess to 7 p.m. when 5 of us will be able to reconvene. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to recess and... Yes, please. Oh, I'm sorry. For the record, we would like to take a recess until 7 p.m. Is there a motion from the floor to recess to 7 p.m.?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Wayne. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Snow. Roll call, please.
Vargas.
Aye.
Wayne.
Aye.
Fay.
Aye.
Gadding.
Aye.
America.
Aye.
Snow.
Aye.
6 ayes.
Motion carries. We will reconvene at 7 p.m.
I'm not even.
Chairman and members of the board, I'm just wondering if we reconvene at 7, if you do have to be out of here by 8,
We are committed to
Finishing.
finish up
Okay.
this evening,
Okay.
whatever time it takes.
Okay, all right. Well,
But we needed a break
All right,
to help some board members accomplish
okay, that's
what
good.
they need to get done.
All right,
All right, thank you.
sure.
I'm kidding.
Okay, for the record, we are back in session from our recess, and I will turn it back over to Ms. McHugh. You were in the middle of asking the witness questions.
Yes. So we were on Exhibit 180. Are these also notes from one of the weekly meetings during the formal intervention process?
Exhibit 180 would be a reflection that Mrs. Souter wrote after having read a portion of Conscious Classroom Management.
And what week?
I apologize. Okay, I apologize.
So this is the portion of...
This is a portion of the readings from Conscious Classroom Management. You're welcome.
What week is that from?
And this is from week 5.
You have a note here at the top of the page. Can you explain what that note is for?
It simply must have been a note to myself to note that we received the reflection after the due date.
Can you turn to Exhibit 181? Are these also notes from one of the weeks during the formal intervention process?
Yes, these would be the notes from week 6.
Can you describe some of your comments here under number 1 and number 2?
Under number 1, we were going to review the annual school counseling plan and review and analyze the school counseling activities that had been offered. Mrs. Souter indicated that she hadn't been able to complete that task. This was on the plan, originally, and we felt that was an indication of her lack of urgency about completing the tasks as they were assigned. Number 2 was a request to help Mrs. Souter see how a school counseling plan impacts the school improvement plan. And also on this item, she indicated she'd not had a chance to complete it. And again, we felt that it was another indication of the lack of urgency around improvement. We wanted her to take our performance concerns to heart in a way that would really impact long-lasting change, and we felt that was indicative of her failure to do so.
And if you refer to number 4, can you explain your comments there?
And number 4 was to provide a summary of the student progress or growth that she had seen as a result of the school counseling groups that she was conducting or with individual students. And again, she indicated she'd not had a chance to complete that item.
So we just went through about 6 weeks of notes on the formal intervention process, and each of those exhibits we went through has a packet of materials with it. Are those some of the supporting documents that were given to Mrs. Souter?
Each week, yes, we tried to contain the items that were utilized each week for her plan. Yes.
So after the 6 weeks of the informal intervention and 7 weeks of the formal intervention, did you note any improvements in Mrs. Souter's performance?
I believe there was a very, very negligible improvement, but our overall recommendation or overall belief was that we had not seen gains in performance to the extent that we would have wanted to see them.
Do you remember what her overall rating was after the formal intervention?
I believe it was a 1.8 on the appraisal.
Okay, I want to talk about some specific instances or specific encounters that you had with Mrs. Souter. Can you explain what an employee consultation conference is?
An employee consultation conference is a formal mechanism by which behavior that is of concern, performance concerns can be shared with an employee. There is a response. There's an indication of action that is expected on the part of the employee to remedy the concern.
Turn to Exhibit 142, please. Is this from an employee consultation conference that you held with Mrs. Souter?
Yes, it is.
Can you explain the reason for this employee consultation conference?
A SAT, which is a student assistance team meeting, was held with a parent. The staff that were in attendance were very concerned about a question in particular that Mrs. Souter asked. It's certainly outside the scope of a school counselor's practice to question whether or not a student was ever deprived of oxygen or birth or experienced any trauma at birth. And so there was a significant concern about the question being asked and then certainly the response on the part of the parent.
Can you describe what the parent's reaction was to Mrs. Souter's question?
As it was reported to me, I was not in attendance, but as it was reported, the mother stopped her, was very emotional, was sobbing, said, "Just stop, please stop," used her hand to make a hand gesture, asked her to just please leave, just go.
Okay, can you turn to Exhibit 118? Is this documentation from another employee consultation conference held?
Yes, it is.
Refer to the bottom of the page where it says workplace behavior issue. Can you explain why this employee consultation conference was held?
A number of students on a particular day, as guidance lessons were approaching, asked to not attend classroom guidance. They reported to their teacher that the previous week, during what was to have been a lunch bunch, that Mrs. Souter gathered them together and explained that they were actually meeting to talk about a situation in which some classmates had apparently been mean. Mrs. Souter defined that behavior as bullying behavior and gathered those students who had been allegedly targeted together. The session was not affected. The students reported that Mrs. Souter raised her voice and was highly accusatory and returned to the classroom very emotional. The concern certainly is that they didn't understand what the purpose of this gathering was. Certainly, if we were looking into a situation of alleged bullying, our protocol would not have us bring both parties together. So that was of great concern to us, and we wanted to review the bullying protocol with Mrs. Souter.
And what date was this employee consultation conference held?
On February 16th of 2016.
Was that during the formal intervention process?
It had not yet officially begun.
So just before the formal intervention?
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some observations of Mrs. Souter's classroom. Can you turn to Exhibit 152? Is this from an observation that you conducted in Ms. Souter's classroom?
Yes, it is.
Can you turn to the second page? At the bottom, it starts with, what could she do to find out if he is afraid of worms? Can you just read the sentence after that?
Mrs. Souter went to a student and held him by the arm to encourage him to sit in his seat.
Is that something that you would expect a school counselor to do?
No.
You turn to Exhibit 153. Is this your post-observation conference summary after that particular observation?
Yes.
Can you explain some of your concerns after that observation?
Students did not understand the objective or the learning target of the lesson. We also discussed the need to utilize consistent procedures and routines to improve classroom management. Mrs. Souter would use an attention-getting signal, and when students did not respond, she would try an alternate attention-getting signal. I discussed with her, waiting a few moments and allowing students an opportunity to comply in order to improve effectiveness. We also discussed the need to communicate warmth and positivity to our students. We talked about smiling and utilizing positive acknowledgments of students, and that those behaviors on the part of a school counselor are the basis for developing rapport and relationships with students. The use of students' names during the lesson was for corrective purposes only, and I did discuss that with her as well. I did speak with her about our recent employee consultation conferences, and again encouraged her to take those suggestions for improvement to heart. Some suggestions that had been made had not been implemented or had been rebuffed, and so I did mention that we may look at a more formal means of providing support.
So you just talked a little bit about Mrs. Souter's relationship with students, so I want to turn to that topic just for a little bit. Can you describe her level of involvement with students as compared to other counselors in the district?
Given the contact logs that we reviewed each week and the high rate of free and reduced lunch data that exists at Gilder, I would anticipate that there would be a number of students that with whom she would have involvement to provide any number of supports. On a weekly basis, there were often very few students and parents that she was in contact with, and so I would anticipate that there would have been larger numbers.
And can you talk a little bit more about the logs? Are those showing individual and small group counseling? the logs of contact with
Yes, I
students?
believe she provided both the information about students she was seeing in groups. The groups began after our informal and formal intervention process was initiated. That was a part of that process. They had not been in existence prior to that time. But she did indicate the students, and we encouraged communication between she and the other administrative members of the team at Gilder, so that there was communication on a daily basis, not simply as a result of the plan and the weekly conversations that we had, but there would be ongoing communication about students that she was supporting.
And earlier today, you mentioned some of the responsive services that she should be providing to students and parents. Can you talk a little bit about your concerns related to that?
We would expect that elementary students would be provided with the general supports that come as a part of life experiences, whether that would be a death in the family, a divorce in the family, a crisis related to health, any number of concerns that can impact the learning environment and distract students from their focus on their education. And so those would be the types of items that just in the normal course of life students experience and would need to seek out the assistance of a counselor.
Okay, is there anything else you noticed about Mrs. Souter's performance that you want to share with the board?
I would think that it would be very important to recognize that a school counselor is someone that we want to be always that positive presence, that person who is always encouraging, who is helping students see possibilities. Language like describing a student as a weird kid with issues is highly unprofessional language that would not be language that one would expect to come from someone whose primary role should be a student advocate. So I would say overall, recognizing that we need someone who is positive, who is encouraging, and is there to always support students in their quest for their education.
And do you support the recommendation to terminate Mrs. Souter's employment?
I do.
We have no further questions.
Mr. Wade, do you have questions for the witness?
Yes, I do. Dr. Bond, I'll try not to get too far out of line here as far as what order we've gone in, but maybe start from the last rather than from the beginning, try to work my way up. Would you look at Exhibit 181 again? Do you recall why Ms. Souter needed extra time? Was it because of a funeral?
She did indicate that she attended a funeral, yes.
So it was something that was unexpected rather than just desire not to complete the project.
I don't know exactly the time frame that it was that week.
It was that week? Okay. Do you know how long she was gone for the funeral?
I do not know.
Do you know whether or not she ever got this Exhibit 181? Did you go over it with her?
Each week we shared conversation. We would have had an opportunity to talk about each of the items that were expected each week.
How about the exhibit itself? Would she have received that, or would you have just talked with her about the items that are identified?
I don't know for certain that an actual copy was provided for her at that time.
If a copy had been provided, would it be customary to have the counselor sign or some indication of receipt and date?
The initial plan was signed and dated, but neither of us, I didn't receive her actual notes in regard to our conferences, nor was there ever anything spoken during the course of the process that our notes would be provided to her in regard to the completion of the plan.
Well, 181 or Exhibit 181 seems to contain a number of important matters, and is it your opinion she should not be apprised of that or have a document to keep her aware of this?
We, as I mentioned, the conversations that occurred each
Right,
week,
right.
we were completely transparent in terms of the information that's contained on this item. I am not aware that we would actually provide our notes to her in addition to the plan.
Do you consider these your notes?
Yes.
Okay. And they were just then what you would have to refer to, but she may not have, depending on what she has taken as far as notes.
Exactly.
Okay. Think it would be a good idea to provide this sort of document to a teacher after you've had an opportunity to talk with her?
I can't say it wouldn't be a good idea, but there was nothing on here that was not communicated.
Okay. I'm just, wondering, since this is a pretty important process, and the informal intervention, the formal intervention is well documented, I just wondered why this particular document wasn't shared with her so that she could continue to know what her progress or lack of progress was.
And I would refer to Human Resources if there is a piece of the process that I'm not articulating, but in terms of the formal final version of what the recommendation was, I believe she was in receipt of that.
All right. All right, I understand. So if I'm getting this wrong, whatever the formal document would require, that would be the extent of it. Other documents that might be prepared, even though they might be helpful, wouldn't be necessarily shared. Is that a safe statement?
I don't know that having it in writing would be any more helpful than having verbally shared all of this information as we move through the process.
The competencies that are identified as deficient in some manner are limited to just a few. Is that correct? It's not the entire rubric, all of the competencies on the rubric.
Exactly. And you're referring to on the formal intervention plan?
Yes.
During the formal plan, we did make a decision to narrow down and prioritize the competencies to provide greater focus, perhaps.
Well, so then when you say that the numerical number that's associated with the document and looking at the appraisal scoring rubric, it only contains those areas that you have some concern about, not the other areas. Is that true?
In order to compare two equal documents, we did utilize the entire appraisal as we did the first time after informal to calculate a numeric representation. But in terms of identifying the areas of priority, we did try to narrow the plan in the hopes that we would achieve greater success.
And maybe this is just something I don't know, but for competencies like competency 4, responsive services or indirect student services, I'm looking at Exhibit 113, those don't apply to teachers and counselors? It's a long ways back there, so take your time.
This applies to school counselors. It's a school counselor appraisal rubric.
Okay. So, and then my question then is, if we've heard, or if the board's heard, and if I have heard that her new average or the new number is 1.8, it doesn't take into consideration those other competencies And is that commonplace? Do you just kind of leave out 4 and 5?
No, as I stated, we did utilize the entire rubric, the appraisal rubric, to ensure that we were calculating her score as we did the first time at the initial start of moving her to formal. But in terms of the plan, and all counselors have their appraisal rubric, they know the document by which they will be measured. And so that was nothing new. She's familiar with that as a part of her performance as a school counselor. It also is representative of the American School Counselor Association competencies. And so anyone going through a program by which they would have been trained or receive professional development later on in their career would recognize those competencies as well.
Should there be somewhere then a total performance appraisal document that would include all of the competencies?
An actual completed document?
Yes.
It was not necessarily provided, I understand that, but we utilized the rubric in terms of coming up with a measure.
Okay. And it may just be me. I'm just not quite understanding, excuse me, why some of the competencies aren't addressed. I mean, you've addressed the issues of, I think, competency 1, competency 2, and 4 were ultimately addressed and were the concerns most recently in, excuse me, in June of this year. But I'm just trying to figure out, if you're looking at an overall appraisal of a person, even though they may have some deficiencies in certain competencies, wouldn't it be more fair to do the overall calculation rather than just the limited numbers of them? Even if you're looking at limited numbers on 2 documents at 2 different times, wouldn't it be better judgment and a better appraisal of their...
Yes, I'm sorry. I agree with you. And that's why we did calculate the appraisal using all competencies listed on the appraisal.
Okay, is that, let's take a look. Is that on exhibit? Let's see here. I'm looking at Exhibit 117, and that's the formal intervention plan. Excuse me. Is that the sort of document that we're talking about, or is in fact, or is there the actual calculation on the form? And I'll look further if I can. I just, my point being, I just want to make sure we get the overall picture. And if there is a document, I've looked at the formal intervention and the informal intervention and appraisal summary. If that is 101, maybe we start there. We have 1 in the various subcategories, I'll call it, and we have 2 with a couple, or I guess 4, so I'll be fair, 3, but I'm still wondering, we have 4 with 2, because I think that was mentioned at the beginning, but I don't see anything in 5. Indirect student services, was that not something that was actually taken into consideration or a part of an appraisal for a counselor?
Yes, all areas, as I mentioned, were included
Okay.
in the calculation.
Am I missing 5 somewhere? Because I see section 6, it says employee goals.
Can you share with us what
101.
exhibit 101, okay.
I think, wait, hang on, maybe it's 102. 102, I'm sorry.
Exhibit 102 is what we're looking at.
perhaps I'm, as I say, I'm just missing something there because it looks like there are zeros in Section 3, individual student planning. Section 5, I don't see anything. Section 6, Section 7, Section 8, and then an overall summary. I guess Section 8 would be the comments, so that wouldn't be, but I assume there'd be something in Section 5 because you have, and I'm not sure if I understand the classification of categories, I should say, categories in Section 5. Collaborates with stakeholders, contributes to a positive climate, provides consultation support to staff and families, advocates for students, and I see a 0 there, and I don't see any.
There is a manager evaluation performance document that would include all of the calculations. I'm not certain if it's been entered, but it was utilized in terms of arriving at the calculations.
So if we just look at the numbers that are on this particular form, yeah, if we go back to page 102, page 1, we have a number of entries, in certain categories, in different categories, and then we get to the end with a rating of 1.8. I mean, that appears to me that only took into consideration those particular categories that are in fact addressed in this particular performance document, and not all of the category sections, and not all of the in areas of concern, or perhaps not concern. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how you put a number with each of them, or if there's any way to address what was going on other than what you've identified here, since there's sections that need to be completed, it appears. And I don't mean to belabor this unnecessarily. I'm just thinking perhaps her overall score was much greater than what appears here, because if in fact we only have part of it, we're just looking at where the deficiencies were. She may have been in a higher level of performance in other areas where a fair assessment would have been much higher for overall appraisal.
Mr. Wakefield will be able to testify as to those numbers that you're asking about.
Okay. All right, thank you. When you were present during meetings that involved and addressed the concerns that you're mentioning here today, did Ms. Souter seem resistant to accept anything? What was her demeanor, if you recall?
Largely, her demeanor was very indifferent, which is why I had conversation with her about taking the recommendations to heart. It was my feeling that she listened, but she appeared to be very indifferent.
Have you had an opportunity to evaluate her before?
As a supervisor, I am not the person who does the actual appraisal, but yes, I have observed her before.
At any time, were you an individual who actually did the appraisal for her or did an evaluation for Ms. Souter?
I have not actually conducted an evaluation.
Okay.
I provided input.
All right.
Mr. Wade, do you have additional questions?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you have additional
I do,
questions?
yes.
Okay.
It's been a while, so I need to
Okay.
sort through here for a little
Okay.
bit. So my apologies for taking a little longer, but yes, I do. Refresh my memory from your testimony if I did not hear it. How long have you known Ms. Souter?
I've been in this role, this is my 11th year, but I knew her, I was acquainted with her prior to that in the previous role, so I'm going to estimate 13 or 14 years.
Was that at another school?
I knew her as we were both elementary counselors.
Was it in a specific school that you were both counselors?
No, I just knew her as another colleague across the
Okay.
district, within the district.
What was your expectation for improvement? Did you expect Ms. Souter to become proficient in all areas?
Yes, I did. I think that's the minimum standard we should expect in terms of staff who are serving our students.
Is that expected of all other teachers and counselors?
Absolutely.
And if there isn't someone that is proficient, they would be on a plan, an intervention plan of some sort?
If they're not, yes, if they're not at a proficient level of performance, absolutely. There would have been a history of employee consultations, I would assume, first, to address those concerns. Mr. Wade, if I could also amend a response I had given to you earlier. You had asked about the time frame when we were talking about week 6 of the formal intervention plan.
Yes.
And our notes that Mrs. Souter had not completed some of the items. I had failed to recall, but I'm seeing notes to the effect that we did extend that due date by a week, and she still was not able to complete it at that time. So I just wanted to amend my response.
Well, I appreciate that, but the extension wasn't necessarily for her to do additional work. It was before she was going to be gone, because she was going to be gone for a funeral.
But we did extend that. I'd forgotten that.
All right, thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Ms. McHugh, do you have questions that arose due to Mr. Wade's questions?
Just a few. Dr. Bond, can you turn to Exhibit 112? Is this the formal intervention plan that was provided to Mrs. Souter?
Yes, it is.
If you turn to the page marked OPS 33, it says week 1 at the top. Is this the timeline for improvement that was provided with the plan?
That's the timeline for that week, yes.
And what is that timeline showing generally?
We were looking at weekly increments.
And are these the same objectives and procedures that Mr. Wade was discussing, which you had notes on other exhibits?
Yes, this is the exact same plan. I just utilized the plan as a place for my note-taking as we moved week to week.
And you mentioned that this is for week 1. Are weeks 2 through 6 provided in this plan?
Yes, the entire plan was provided and reviewed initially.
And did Mrs. Souter sign this document?
Yes, she did sign the document.
So she received this whole timeline for improvement.
Yes, she did.
Can you turn to Exhibit 149? Is this a post-observation conference summary
It
for
is.
Mrs. Souter?
It is.
And you mentioned that you knew Mrs. Souter before she began the intervention process, correct?
I did.
So what year is this summary from?
This was a summary of an observation that I did in 2011.
If you refer to the paragraph beginning with areas of refinement, can you explain some of the areas of refinement you identified in 2011?
I first mentioned the need to inform students of the skill being taught at the start of the lesson to provide students with the objective so they knew what they were about to learn. In addition, I mentioned that the pre-observation form that I use that helps me know what the lesson is going to be for that day was not clearly delineated with the competency, so I pointed that out to her as well. Another refinement that we discussed that day was the need for her to communicate and exhibit sensitivity, empathy, and acceptance to all students. I suggested some ways that might be done by greeting students warmly at the beginning of the lesson, by smiling, by providing positive feedback. I encouraged her to recognize that typically we would expect a recommended ratio of 4 positive interventions to 1 corrective interaction. So those were some of the strategies that I encouraged. I also wanted to remind her that all interactions with students, staff, and families must always be respectful and strength-based. I further reminded her that a counselor's nurturing role as a student advocate must be communicated through all of our activities in the school counseling program.
Were any of the areas of refinement you identified in this document also areas of refinement that were addressed during the intervention process?
They were.
Did Mrs. Souter sign this document?
Yes, she did.
Can you turn to Exhibit 150, please? Can you explain what this document is?
Mrs. Souter disagreed with portions of my post-observation and asked me to alter my ratings.
And if you refer to the paragraph beginning with the word given, can you read that out loud?
Given that you have aspirations for leadership opportunities in the district, I think it would be beneficial for your professional growth to focus energy and reflection on the nuances of demonstrating warmth, empathy, and positivity.
We have nothing further.
Mr. Wade, do you have any additional
I
questions?
do. In light of the questions, I do. Would you please see the exhibits that were here? Thank you. I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 5. Exhibit 5 appears to be dated the same date as Exhibit 50. Is that correct? Or 49, I'm sorry. Is that correct?
Exhibit 49?
Yes.
I'm not showing an exhibit.
Okay. 149. I'm sorry. I have these. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. 149. I have these marks because I don't have all the. 149 that we were just discussing that says Form D at the top.
Yes.
All right. What is Exhibit 5 is really the whole document, isn't it? I mean, it's got all page 1, page 2, and all the forms attached to it, doesn't it?
When you say the entire form,
Well, I mean, it's the entire summary. It's got everything. It's got the professional standards. It's got the pre-observation information. It's got the individual development plan and activity record. It's got notes. It's signed by both you and Ms. Souter, isn't it?
this is not an appraisal document. This is an audit of the National School Counseling Association's professional standards.
But Form D is taken from this, isn't it? It's the same. I mean, that's Form D, which is the same Form D in this particular Exhibit 5.
Yes, Form D, yes, is a post-observation summary.
Okay. All
The
right.
audit is a tool that the American School Counseling Association encourages counselors to use to audit their programs, to audit their own personal competencies professionally.
And you did, in fact, do that for Ms. Souter, right?
Yes.
You did. And would you look at Form F? Does it not say that she has great communication skills, adapts well to teaching all ages, ability to organize a variety of projects, works well with students, parents, and faculty, and community resources?
This is a form that the counselors complete themselves,
Okay.
their own
Do you-
self-reflection. So those are Mrs. Souter's.
But do you think she
words.
accomplished that? That's what I'm asking.
No, I don't agree with those comments.
Okay.
But those were Mrs. Souter's assessment of her
I
skills.
I see. I just want to make sure I understand your perception. If you look at page 3, that's the actual counselor observation audit of performance standards, Form C. There are 5 levels, and she is in 4 for most all of these. Is that correct?
She is on 4 for many of them. And I did alter some of my ratings. These are ratings that we use informally to help counselors determine where they are. And certainly, as I encourage counselors to be strength-based with their students, I too want to be as strength-based as I can with counselors. I see that is the best way to encourage growth, is to recognize wherever possible positive qualities.
So Exhibit 50 and Exhibit 51, which I think, or I'm sorry, 49 and 50. 49 and 50.
For the record, is that 149?
Yeah,
and
I'm sorry, again,
150?
149 and 150. Yes.
Thank you.
149 is Form D of this particular audit, and 150 is what resulted in changes that are on Form C?
She asked to have a number of those ratings altered, and I did agree with her that I could find some place that we could make some adjustments, but I was not able to do that on two items, 12 and 21.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to find a way that I could listen to her concerns and respond to those concerns, but there were two areas that I could not change. Number 12 would be exhibiting sensitivity, empathy, and acceptance, and number 21, communicating positively with students and staff.
And there again, I guess I'm asking you, before I was asking you about the whole overall picture, this particular document is the whole overall picture of Ms. Souter at that time as you assessed her performance and conduct. Is that correct? As an audit.
This is an audit, absolutely,
Right.
not an appraisal.
But what is the difference between an audit when you're looking at the person's abilities?
We were looking, it's a combined effort. You saw the information that she shared as well. So working jointly to recognize strengths and areas for refinement and have some means of determining mutually agreed upon goals.
All right, I just want to make sure I understood where Form F came from, and it was a part of this particular collection of documents. Is it not correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I will place that as a part of that particular time, at that particular time, 2/18/11. Mrs. Souter was doing pretty well at that time, wasn't she? She had pretty high marks.
But again, this was not her appraisal.
I know, but the assessment of her work on a basis of an audit of professional standards.
And again, typically these
Counselor
audits would typically be done by an individual counselor.
Okay.
I often led counselors to doing them so that they could self-reflect and make some determinations for themselves how they would see their performance. But certainly I wanted to provide my input and help them see where I'm seeing some concerns as well.
And you would want it accurate as much as she would, I'm sure, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to look at I think it was Exhibit 112 that you said Ms. Souter signed, and I see the signature at the back of the Souter Enclosures document, the last page. Do you know why the individual pages from the timeline for improvement? You were talking about the timeline for improvement, and you talked about the weeks, various weeks. Do you recall that? Yeah, on Exhibit 112, page 4. And I guess 5. Do you know why the indicators of accomplishment aren't marked, whether it's fully accomplished, partially accomplished, not accomplished? I mean, do you know why the document is not completed on a weekly basis? It looks like that's the same for each week.
It seemed as though the notes that we took specific to each item, we didn't fully discuss the level of accomplishment each week, but rather made specific, had specific conversation around each item each week.
But apparently it serves a role or function to have it on there so a person knows whether or not they've accomplished or not accomplished, rather than just have general statements as to what has and hasn't been done in a sentence. They know whether something's been completed.
And it appeared that as we had those conversations, it would have been clear based on each of those items whether we had fully or partially or not accomplished each specific item rather than a general summary for each week's work.
Okay. All right. Do you ever have any indication of whether or not something is accomplished or not accomplished? An actual document says fully accomplished, not accomplished, or partially accomplished?
Do
That you're aware of? Do you ever see a document like that other than what we have here that will indicate whether or not there's been a completion, a fully accomplished workload or whatever's been assigned for a particular week? Do you have a document that will indicate that?
I don't believe we do.
Okay. And I don't want to be facetious, but wouldn't it have been pretty easy just to mark this partially accomplished or not accomplished or fully accomplished? So, boy, you'd send a message pretty strongly there.
It would send a message. The details also provide a
Yeah.
similar message.
So they both would send a pretty strong message.
Absolutely.
I have no further questions.
Okay, we're going to ask the Board of Education questions now, and I'm just going to, I have a question quickly, if you don't mind, since we're on document 112, and I'm a little confused, so I want to make sure I understand and the rest of the board understands. Our pages, starting with page 4, were those prepared ahead of time saying this is what we're going to do each week? And then the other exhibit that we looked at was the notes off of that? I'm just trying to understand.
Can you read the Bates number underneath so it's clear for me and the record?
So,
On page
33.
4. Okay.
So 33, correct, 33 through 38, were those the detailed plans by week of what was going to happen that were given prior to
Yes.
that event? So page 39 says that this was signed on 2/22, so this was the timeline for improvement that was given on 2/22/16. Therefore, it was prior to these weeks and nothing could be checked yet because it hadn't happened? Is that?
On this particular document, yes. This was
Okay.
the initial plan, absolutely. This was the initial
Okay.
plan that we presented to her as the plan
And that's why there's
began.
no documentation on
Absolutely.
it, correct? Okay.
And I
just wanted-
apologize for my confusion between the original plan and the notes plan.
Okay, and so we saw the notes, and I don't even remember now what exhibit it was, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to follow up on that.
Yes.
Okay, so that's clear, that completely
Thank you.
clarifies
Yes,
what we
that
just,
clarifies exactly why
heard.
that would
So,
not be completed.
Additional questions from Board of Education members? Mr. Wayne?
Where was the notes page at again? What? $172? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this process, because we're going to walk down process lane for a second. So who actually is her direct supervisor?
The principals in the buildings complete the appraisals for all staff,
So the principals complete all of these appraisals.
the appraisals.
So if a
With the-
person is put on informal or formal intervention, it is the principal who will have that overall contact with the individual.
Supervisors work right alongside as programmatic specialists to support principals in these situations.
Who sits down weekly with that individual and say, according to the formal plan, in these notes, you are meeting expectations or not meeting expectations?
Both the principal and myself as a supervisor and OEA representation was
Now-
available each week as well,
Now, is that weekly?
weekly.
And that happened in this case?
Yes,
You met weekly with Ms. Suter?
I did.
Okay. And the principal was there every week too?
There were times when I might not be available, or a principal might not be available, or the OEA representative was available. We would discuss at each meeting our attendance for the next meeting. We all attempted to attend all weekly meetings, but there were occasions when one representative might not have been there, and we all agreed on how those dates were scheduled and could have readjusted if needed to be. And we did readjust times as often as we needed to.
So if there was 42, what is the purpose of the time frame that was selected for the formal intervention? Why is 6 weeks selected?
I don't know if there's I don't know that I have the answer for that. I don't know if I can refer that.
Do you know?
I think that's a common time frame that's given, but in terms of why that specific time period, I can't answer that.
Based on your history, do they ever do them longer?
I would imagine it could potentially go on longer if you were seeing progress and felt that the progress might continue.
Let me ask some foundational questions. Based on your years of experience as a supervisor, what's the average length? Or do you know the average length of a formal process?
6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks. Do you know why that is?
I don't know specifically why 6 to 8 weeks.
Have you seen formal processes that are less than 4 weeks?
No, I have not.
And the purpose of the 6 to 8 weeks is so the supervisors can have that time period to evaluate?
But it also gives some time for the staff member to make gains and to improve performance.
So in this 6 to 8 week period, there was a minimum of six meetings here since it was 6 weeks?
Yes.
But not everybody was at every meeting?
Correct.
Okay.
And I believe we had some meetings where we would have someone on speakerphone if that was necessary. I mean, we did everything we could to all be there.
So how'd you document that?
Those were the notes that as we recorded each item and discussed each item that was to be completed for that week.
Does it say who's present on any of the notes? 'Cause I didn't see that. So if you can point to that for me, that'd be great.
I don't know that it specifically indicates who's present each week.
Well, so I also see in the notes.
What exhibit are you looking at?
I'm looking at the 176 exhibit, the weekly progress notes based off of the formal plan. So we take
for one specific week, right?
I'm looking specifically at 167, March 14th. 176, March 14th, 2016 through March 18th. When was our spring break?
I don't have a calendar in front of me. I don't recall the dates of spring break.
Did you have a meeting over spring break?
No, we would not have had I wish you would have been off contract time, so we would not have had a meeting that week.
So then it was really only 5.
We would not have had a meeting. She would have been off contract. She would not have been at the building during spring break.
So then this was really only 5 weeks of observation.
I would have to look at a calendar to be absolutely certain. But no, there would have had to have been 6 weeks because we had activities for a 6-week period of time. So we would have had to have accounted for that.
Okay.
And there was the conversation was not limited to our weekly meetings. As you look through the notes, you'll see references to other conversations. There was support anytime. It wasn't limited to simply that time during that week.
And during that formal process, after that meeting, who gave a written communication to that person of what was discussed and whether they're meeting expectations or whether they're not?
There wasn't a formal written document provided each week.
Was there any written communication?
Not written, no. We had the discussion. We each independently would have recorded our own personal notes, but it was clear in terms of our discussion of each item what had been accomplished each week.
So each person recorded their own personal notes. I guess counselors, do we have those from everybody who was there?
We have just per week all the documents, so I'm not sure whose notes are whose.
It's a huge foundational problem.
Can you share with us what exhibit that is?
We don't have OEAs. We wouldn't have OEAs.
So, for the record, because it wasn't on the mic,
Oh,
we don't have you do not have OEA's documentation. And then what exhibit were you looking at that had documentation?
176
176.
through 181, and there were also some documents at the end of Exhibit 168, I believe, that were the notes from week 1.
So whose notes is in the records right now?
These notes are mine and Mrs. Kathy Schmidt, the principal.
Mr. Wayne, spring break was March 7th through the 11th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wright.
And there is no plan for that week. I just checked.
So prior to August 2014, there's nothing in here. You had no issues with this particular individual, at least in this record.
There was no formal activity that occurred in
Was
terms
there
of her.
any informal prior to 2014, August 2014?
There was not a specific observation, no.
So is it safe to say that maybe your first instance where you had an issue was based off of Mr. Superintendent Mark Evans having a conversation with you about his interactions with her on August 19, 2014? That would be Exhibit 103.
I believe there was conversation in the spring prior to.
No, actually, I looked at that. I appreciate you bringing that up. And that was Exhibit 1. That was Exhibit 136, and that's actually the same document from August 19th. So I don't have any communications prior to Mr. Evans having a conversation with you about the feedback she gave regarding the Gold Stars. The Gold Awards, excuse me. That's not what yeah, I saw those two. But she had, I understand that there was 121 and 119, or 119 and 120 as a negative email that obviously was ran somewhere. I don't know if it's in her personnel file or not, but I'm looking at the reports that you gave from Skinner, and then there's a gap period, and then all of a sudden Mr. Evans has a conversation with you, and now immediately 4 days later there's a concern from a parent on August 24th email, and then there's a snowball effect here.
There were other instances of parents having concerns. I don't know. I would be remiss to try to find them now, but I know that there were other. I had been asked the question if it was common that students not go to guidance at the request of a parent, which is not a common occurrence. So I know there were those concerns that existed.
So tell me, what do you remember about the conversation with Mr. Evans on August 19th? How'd that conversation go?
I did not have a conversation with Mr. Evans
It
directly.
says Ms. Schmidt and Dr. Bond met with Ms. Suter to discuss the concerns shared by Superintendent Evans during his visit. Who did he share those concerns with? Do you know?
he shared those concerns with Mrs. Schmidt.
Have you since then had conversations with Mr. Evans regarding Ms. Suter?
No, I have not.
So from 2014 to 2016, is your testimony you have not had a conversation with Mr. Evans about this?
I don't speak with him about specific counselor performance.
So let's talk about who you might speak with regarding specific counselors' performances. You talked earlier about the confidentiality of working with students. Do you also feel that way about working with individual counselors, their performances, and not sharing with other individuals?
Yes. Unless it's certainly someone who has a professional need to know.
So do you feel if somebody is doing a neutral observation, they need to know that a person's on a formal process or not? If you send that person in there to do a neutral evaluation?
Each of the steps that we included in our informal and our formal plan of intervention were designed to provide additional support to Mrs. Souter. Our intention throughout the efforts that we made were to improve her performance. That's the district's stand, and that is certainly the feeling of the principal and myself as we work through this intervention, that we would work to help her improve and regain or achieve proficiency.
With all due respect, you didn't answer my question. The question is, do you feel it's appropriate to share whether a person is on a formal or informal plan when doing a neutral observation of another staff member?
As I would share information regarding a student, if it was going to be in the student's best behalf, I would breach confidentiality. If I were to tell a parent about a concern, I would breach confidentiality. Mrs. Souter was also aware, so I don't feel it was a breach of confidentiality when she was aware that there would be independent observers as a part of our plan. She knew that at the onset of the plan and did not raise any objection to that. So I didn't do so without her permission.
Did she know that you were going to tell them that she was on a formal plan? Is that your testimony? Or did she just know that she was going to have neutral, independent evaluators?
I honestly don't recall that I said it's a part of a formal plan. I don't know that was spoken specifically when those principals were invited to observe.
So if I were to tell you that both principals said that you told them without being questioned by them, you offered that she was on a formal plan, would you saying that they were dishonest?
No, I don't recall specifically saying that she was on a formal plan.
So then in a hypothetical, do you feel that is in a professional, ethical, breach of confidentiality, as you said, to tell another staff member that they are on a formal plan? Let's start with that first.
Mrs. Souter was aware that there would be independent observers, so I don't feel as though there was a breach of confidentiality when she had that information at the onset. If she was concerned about having someone else observe her, that could have been expressed.
Ma'am, that's not what I'm asking. Doctor, I'm not asking whether she was concerned if somebody was going to watch her or not. What I'm asking is, you spoke heavily of confidentiality, and you said it was very important as it relates to students. And my question for you, doctor, is does that same high regard apply to staff?
I believe it does.
So in what aspects do you, okay, let's strike that. Looking back, clearly both of the principals, if I were to tell you, testify that you told them that, would you go back and not tell them that she was in a formal intervention? Hindsight's 20/20, but looking back, would you say that was probably not the best thing to do?
My efforts in this situation have been to ensure that our students receive the best school counseling services possible. In order to enlist the support of additional observers, it would be in a perfect world. Perhaps it would have been best to not share that. I don't recall specifically whether I did or not, to be perfectly honest. But certainly, if we could protect everyone from the information that we're privileged to, it would be ideal to not have anyone know.